What's up guys, TFC here. Welcome back to my video tutorial series on making tracks. In this part we're going to be taking a look at texture masks, texture layers, how we're going to lay that out in our HMF and THT file, and how what we do in there affects what we see on our track. So to achieve this, I've set up a folder right here, and this contains the texture tiles that we're going to use. I'm not going to use the ones from the example track because I've got my own that I like to use, and I'll give you a quick tour around those and how they look, how we use the SHDs properly, normal maps, that kind of thing. I've also prepared a file that demonstrates exactly how we do these layers, which we'll be taking a look at shortly as well. So the first step when we do this is to convert this image that we made last time into masks. So if you remember, we left this as a layered image, so we can remove any element of that we want, and we can export whatever element of this we want as a mask. So let's talk about what masks actually do. So first of all, a mask is made up of two parts. It's made up of a white image and a transparent background. So this is green right now because that's what we used in our image, our layout image. We're just going to make that white. So to do that, I'm going to go to Colors, Brightness and Contrast. I'm going to whack the brightness all the way up, and I'm going to whack the contrast all the way up, and that will just give us a white image with a transparent background. So this white area here is where we're going to see our grass. This transparent image here, we're going to see nothing. So if you think of this as layers, then we're layering this on top of something like that. We're going to see grass on top of whatever layers underneath. What you see where these masks are is a tiled image. So if we take a look at our grass TGA, we'll edit that with GIMP, this is what it looks like. Now, this is basically a seamless texture, which means if you were to lay one of these here, one of these here, one of these here, and so on next to each other, you wouldn't notice the join until it was repeated a lot. So if I tile this, say 50 times on our 2048 image, so we'll go and work that out really quickly. So 2048 divided by 50 is 40.96 for each one. So let me just knock that up really quickly. So that's going to be 41 roughly. Okay, so there's our small little tile. Now it's not going to look like this in game, but this is just for an example of how the system works. So if I copy that, make a new layer. Alright, so I've made a new layer, I've copied our clipboard image into that, and I'm just going to fill that in there. So you see, you can notice the repeating texture quite a bit here, but when we actually use it in game, you probably won't be able to spot that at all. So right here we have this texture repeated, 50 times along left to right, 50 times top to bottom. So that's 50 times repeated. If we right click that, add layer mask, we're going to add black full transparency. I'm then going to copy our grass mask, the top here, paste it into the layer mask. What you'll see is, wherever that layer mask sits, it displays the texture. Yeah? That is all our layer mask is doing. So the white dictates where the texture goes. The repetitions dictate how many times that image is repeated within that mask. And that's basically all there is to it. Now we know how the masks work. So let's take a look at this document. So I knocked this up to basically demonstrate exactly how I do my layers and my masks. You don't have to do them the same, but this is the method I've used over time and I've found works really well. So I've done it bottom to top, and the reason for that is that's the way the game reads the layers in the HMF and THT. So it's better to get used to doing that now and always stick to this direction, otherwise we might confuse things. So the very top of the layers, let's start at the top. The very top layer I have is grass. Now grass sits on top of everything else, right? So it's the most visible thing. It doesn't sit under anything except possibly an object. So grass is the top. For the grass I use the mask, which we just saw. I also use an FX mask, which is the way of adding 3D grass. Alright. The next layer I use is sand. Now I call it sand, it's actually off track, and it's the very top, and that's going to be the lightest texture on the track, and for that again I use a mask. The next one I do is edge. Now that's the edge of the track. The reason I do that is because in real life the edges of the track are often raised up where it's been pushed aside when the track's been turned or whatever, and this is often a lot rougher. So I like to use a texture with less repetition, which makes it appear bittier, and it also means you can do the same with your normal map to make it seem rougher. And for that again I use a mask. I then have 4 soil layers. Now these I don't use masks for, and the reason for that is with the deformation, if you drive through the edge, it's going to deform and it's going to reveal what's underneath it, which is topsoil number 1, which is going to be darker. When you ride over things in real life, you make a rut, which is darker. If you ride over the sand, which is going to sit on top of this right here, this topsoil mask, it's going to deform, it's going to reveal this underneath it. So from this point on, I don't use masks. And these are basically 4 textures that get darker and darker. They're all the same texture, they're all the same repetition. Sometimes you can use less repetitions, which means you'll have a coarser texture. If you want to, sometimes you can use more repetitions, which means you'll have a finer texture. Either way, it will look different to the layer that you've ridden through. So as the track deforms, it gets darker and darker within the deformation. So that's the setup that I use. That works for me really well. So should we take a look at these textures? So these are my 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So I'll load them into GIMP one at a time. And the way I've laid them out is 4 is at the very bottom. So 4 is the darkest. They then get lighter and lighter and lighter. Alright, so the other textures I use are edge and sand. So there's edge. Edge is slightly lighter than the topsoil layer. And there's sand, which is the off-track. Now, it doesn't have to be sand, it can be soil as well. But that is the kind of lightness that we're looking at for the off-track areas. Alright, we've already taken a look at grass. That's the grass texture I'm going to be repeating, although you can use, there's plenty out there, you can pick whichever one you like. I just find for me this one has worked. We'll have a quick look at the grass FX. Now this is the grass FX. This is basically 4 128 pixel wide images stuck together. So when the game reads this, take fixed aspect ratio, it's going to read this section, then it's going to read this section, and so on and so on. 4 blocks, so you can have 4 different looking bits of grass, and it will repeat those and randomize them so it looks genuinely quite random, quite nice. And that's about it. So if we now head over to our Notepad, I've got 2 example files here, an HMF and a THT. So the HMF the graphics/appearance file, the THT, the collisions and materials file. So in the HMF, you can see I've got layer 0 with my bottom texture, layer 1 with number 3, layer 2 with number 2, layer 3 with number 1, and in my collisions file, materials file, I've got layer 0, which is sand, and in this example you can make this material sand, soil, compact soil, soft soil, grass. So in here I've got layer 0 as sand. Now this thickness is actually the thickness of the material itself, whereas this thickness is the thickness of the texture image. So the texture image for my second to last layer is 0.03 meters. So once you go down that deep, it will start showing the texture underneath it. I keep that relatively shallow so that when you ride over a bit of dirt, it quickly reveals what's underneath. Layer 0 has got 10 because I just put that as a matter of course. Personally, I don't think it will ever work through that, but I've always put thickness of 10 just to make sure. Physically, being as this is sand, I've put these layers as quite shallow. But if this was a soil track, you could put these physical layers a bit deeper, so it takes a lot longer to work through the deformation. So we've got basically nothing in our HMF or our THT. We've got one layer, and in that one layer we've got that one repeated texture. So we're going to start by putting in 1, 2, 3 and 4. So we'll copy this as a good example. Layer 0 is now going to reference first of all the folder. So I'm just going to go to our Maggiora maps folder. I'll copy all of these files into here. Okay, so it references maps, as in the maps folder, texture 4, as in the bottom texture, and we're going to repeat that 50 times. I'm going to copy that layer, call it layer 1. It always starts at 0. So if we set this to 2 right now, number of layers 2, that would be layer 0 and layer 1. So it always starts at 0. This is going to be layer 3, and we're going to keep that repetition at 50. I'm going to change the thickness to 0.03. We're then going to copy that, call it layer 2, and that's going to reference texture 2. I'm going to copy that, and we'll call that layer 3, and it's going to reference texture 1. Now, what that will give us is one solid layer of our number 1 texture, repeated 50 times. You won't be able to see any of the layers underneath until you ride over it, and you'll work that away. So we've now got 4 layers. We're going to need to set that number of layers to 4. So quite basically, without any masks, we're going to just hop across to our THT file. We'll have a look at the example. As you can see, you can reference masks if you want to give a specific mask a surface type. So if we want the grass to be material type grass, then we can reference the grass mask in there so it only affects the grass area. So for now, we're going to do exactly the same. Material 0, material 1, material 2, and material layer 3. So 0, 1, 2, and 3 tie up with our 0, 1, 2, and 3. If this is referencing what happens with our number 1 texture layer, then layer 3 will reference what surface type that has and how thick the physical surface is. So in our example, we got that quite at 0.1. Let's set this to 0.2. 0.2 meters. That's fairly deep, whereas we're going to keep the thickness of our textures quite shallow so it burns through that quite quickly. So we start seeing some real change quite early on, which is what you want. Again, we're going to change our number of material layers to 4 to match, and that is pretty good. So although we're not going to see anything really straight away, we'll save them both, just run map.bat. Bear in mind we're just running our graphics file, our graphics generation at the moment, not collisions, and that's just for the purpose of seeing how our track's going to look. And we'll load map view. Just take a look to see what we have now. So as you can see, we've got one solid layer absolutely everywhere. And that's fine because we've used no masks, so we've got no way of defining where these textures are going to go. This is our base. Anything you ride through that you burn through the texture of will reveal this underneath it, which is kind of cool. Now, at the moment, these have no normal maps. So we can give those normal maps using SHD files. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So if we go into our maps folder, I've got an example SHD that I copied in, and let's just take a look at that. So that contains a reference to a normal map, how many times that's repeated, and the shininess of the spec map. Now I did cover normal maps last time, but I'll quickly go over them again, just quickly for people that haven't watched the previous video that might be just watching this to learn how to use the textures. So I've got a normal map file right here, trackn.tga, which is what this SHD references. Has to be in the same folder. So let's edit that with GIMP. The way normal maps work in MX Bikes is you have the normal map and you have the specular map in the alpha channel. So you might just be able to see a slight faded blue color to that layer. If I add a layer mask, layers alpha channel, and we look at that, so right click and show layer mask, you'll see that is the spec map. Okay, the dark areas won't be reflective, the light areas will be, in a specular sense. If I undo that, we don't want that. If I remove the alpha channel completely, you'll be able to see the normal map. So that's the way it works. If you want to import your own normal maps, I'll show you how to do that. I'll just quickly add the layer mask so I can copy the spec map and paste that as a new image. Okay. And I'm just going to delete the alpha channel. Okay, so this is your normal map. If you had a normal map file, you like the look of it, load it into GIMP just like this. Right click the layer, add layer mask, layers, alpha channel, add that, copy your spec map, go to your layer mask, paste it in, drop it down, apply layer mask. That's your normal map. You can now save that as a normal map and the game will read both the normal map and the spec map. Simple as that. So we're going to use trackn for every one of our normal maps for our surfaces because it works quite nicely. We're just going to use different repetitions to give it a different texture. So the way the SHD files work is you need one for every texture that you've done. So we'll copy it, we'll paste it, we'll rename it to 1.shd. So when the number one texture is loaded, it will use that SHD, which will then use that normal map at 80 repetitions. So I'm just going to change, I'm going to load 1.shd, I'm going to change the repetitions to 50. So I think that'll be enough for a demonstration. And all we're going to do is copy the SHD file, paste it, rename it to 2.shd, paste it again, rename it to 3.shd, paste it again, rename it to 4.shd. So now, when we run map.bat, now we'll go to map view. You can now see we have normal maps. And that looks pretty good to me. So what you can do, which looks really cool, is if you find a really nice texture that you like, you can make a normal map from that texture, repeat it the same number of times, and it will really make it pop. Now for me, I'm quite happy to use a different normal map to the texture that I've got with different repetitions, because I think my texture's so generic and plain. As you can see, it's actually kind of hard to see it tiled. I mean, it's not, but compared to some, this is a very good tiled texture. So using normal maps actually for me gives it 2 lots of depth, which I really like. But it's up to you how you want to do it. Do it your way. Experiment. That's the important thing. Find something that you really like. Okay, so now we've done basic texturing and basic normal maps. We're now going to go and do a mask. So head over to GIMP. We'll load our image that we used before. We have a look at our masks document and the order of things that appear. We've done 4, 3, and 2, and 1. Okay, we've got edges of the track, which I'm not going to do for this tutorial, but I am going to do later. So the next thing that appears is going to be sand, and then grass. So I need a sand mask and a grass mask. So to get those, first of all, I'm going to do the sand mask, which means I don't want to see grass. All I want to see is the track, right? And for that, I'm going to select everything that is not on the track. I'm going to disable that, make a new layer. And then I'm going to fill all of that white. Okay. What I'm going to do as well, because I don't want this to go right up to the edges of the track, I make a new layer underneath, make it black, merge this down so that we now have one layer black and white. I'm then going to go filters, generic, erode. Now what that's going to do is erode the white pixels by 1. And I'm going to repeat that a couple of times. So filters, repeat, erode, filters, repeat, erode. I'm then going to go filters, blur, Gaussian blur. I don't want to do too much, maybe about 2. About 2. Okay, that. I'm then going to go filters, noise, pick, which will rough the edges. I'm going to repeat it, not too many times, maybe about there. Press OK. And what I'm then going to do is go colors, color to alpha, and I'm going to pick black, which will make the black transparent. That is going to do for our sand mask, at least for this tutorial, until I have more later on when we do our track. We're going to make this a lot more detailed, but this will definitely serve a purpose for this tutorial. So I'm going to file, export as, I'm going to put it in our Maggiora maps folder, and I'm going to call it sand mask.tga. And that's important that this is a TGA. Every file that you use for your masks, your textures, your normal maps all have to be TGAs. I believe you can also use a few other formats, but you're going to have to look on the Biboso track creation rules for what formats you can use, but TGA is a safe bet. Alright, so we now have our sand mask, which is in our maps folder, right there. So in order to use that, we take a look at our example, and we have a layer here that is actually sand anyway, and it uses the sand mask. So I'm going to copy that entire section there within the braces. We'll just go to our HMF, going to add a new layer. In fact, I'll copy that entire layer because it's going to work. So there we go, layer 4, open brace, we've got maps sand, which is right there. We've got mask equals maps sand mask, which is right there. The repetitions are going to be for the tile. Mask is always going to be a repetition of 1. I'm going to set that to 50. Thickness is going to be thicker than the on track because I don't want to be able to burn through that texture too quickly, so I'm going to make that 0.2, and I'll save that. And let's have a look at the corresponding material layer. So this is a new one as well. If we paste this layer in here, layer 4, got material type of sand. I think you can also use gravel, which should do, but let's just stick to sand for now. We've got a mask for that material type. So what that means is wherever you ride on this white area will be sand type surface. Wherever you ride on this area will still remain soil. And we're going to have a big thickness on that, so call it 0.2. We'll go with the same. Okay, so we're going to need to change our number of layers now to 5 on both. I'm going to save that, and I'm also going to add a copy of this SHD. So I'll copy number 4 and I'll rename it sand because it has to match our texture sand. And now we have our first layer with a mask. So if we go back to Majora folder and run map.bat, and let's take a look in map view. We now have an off-track mask, sand, and although it looks very basic and boring right now, the whole point of layers is building them up. We can use brushes to make them more exciting. We're going to have an edge mask on the edge of the track. When the height map has some more definition, we'll have a much better looking track. But for now, this is exactly what we need, and it's a very good demonstration of how to use masks. So let's just add the grass mask on the end to finish it off. So nice and simple. Got our grass mask right there. I'm also going to go filters, noise, pick, and we'll use some of that just to rough up the edges, up the repeat a little bit. There we go. I'm going to go File, Export As, keep it as TGA, and we're going to call that grass mask. Export that. There's someone else down there asking about masks, so it's a good job I'm doing this tutorial. Alright, so go back to our maps folder. We've now got grassmask.tga. So grass works a bit differently. I'm just going to go to my example HMF over here. Now this is the grass mask that I have. I'm going to copy the whole thing and we'll walk through what it does. So we'll paste that in as a new layer. Okay, so layer 5, I've got map grass.tga, repetitions of 50. Mask we're going to use is the one we just made, grassmask.tga. Thickness, we'll make that 0.2 as well, whatever for now. Now, you have another variable right here called grass, and that has its own set of attributes. Inside these braces, you've got density, which is how clumped together the grass is or how sparse it is. I found 10 works pretty well. You've got height, which is going to be physical height of the grass. You've got height difference. Now, I believe that is kind of it can be anywhere between these two and it will randomize. You've also got width and width difference. Although don't quote me on what that difference does, it's just what I think it does. Texture is going to use the grass FX that we looked at earlier, which was this file. Now you can replace these images with anything you like. Just remember they are 4 128 by 128 boxes. You can make those 256 by 256 if you want. And the density map basically means it's going to alter the density by where the mask is. So for example, if I was to go into our grass mask file and I was to erase a bunch of stuff, save that as the density map, although your grass texture would still appear on these areas, the 3D grass wouldn't. So you've got secondary control over that, but we're not going to use that for now. We're just going to leave it as is. So that's how the grass mask works. You're going to have to you're going to have to make sure all of these files are present and accounted for in your maps folder, and also that you're using the maps folder when you reference these textures. So we're going to have a look at our THT example. So layer 5, which I'm going to copy, and I'm going to chuck that in our actual THT. So that's material, soil. You can change that to grass if you want. It just changes how the bike behaves. It doesn't change what roost you see in this instance. We're going to leave the maps as grassmask.tga, and we'll put the thickness to 0.2 as well. So that's going to need upping to 6, the amount of layers, because we now have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's going to need upping to 6 in the HMF. So we'll save both of those, head back to our Imagery folder, run map.bat, and let's take a look. Okay, so now it's really starting to come together. You can see that very quickly, from just drawing over the layout image that we had, we've managed to get a very, very quick, rough and ready mask setup going, and texture setup going for our track. 3D grass looks really good. Don't make it too big, that's the only warning. And the reason for that is you can only see 3D grass from a certain distance. So for example, over here it's very dense and lush, and it looks very realistic. When you start looking over here, you start seeing what looks like the edges of the grass, and when you look all the way over here, you won't see any of that at all. It won't be rendered. The bigger you make it in the HMF, as in the grass array down the bottom here, the bigger you make these settings, so the larger the grass will appear. For example, Glen Helen, the 3D grass on that is huge. You can see it from a long way away. So if we made that very big, it would be rendered all the way down the bottom there. And the problem with that is processing. The 3D grass is very, very heavy on processing. So don't overuse it. Don't make it too big so you can see it from far away, and don't do anything stupid with it, like use it for trees, which will appear as billboards. As you can see, 3D grass is 2D images, but whatever you do, don't use it for billboards. If you want to do anything like that, you're going to have to wait until you make objects, and then you're going to want X-shaped trees, or something which is something like what I've done before, which is way less processor hungry, way less graphically intensive than the 3D grass. But there you go, simple as that. So I'm just going to go and test this out. But other than that, that will cover it for this video. So I hope that's been helpful for everybody. As usual, if you want to keep up to date with this series and anything else that's upcoming, then please subscribe. Please give the video a like if you found it helpful. And coming up next time, we'll be looking at really sculpting some jumps out of the height map. We'll be looking at adding a lot more detail to that, and hopefully we'll get much further on with this track. Alright, thanks a lot. Catch you later.